Well, hello there and welcome to Conversations in Color. This is the fourth episode of our second season here, and really excited about the conversation I just had with Dr. Salika Ducksworth-Lawton, my dear friend. We talked about the kind of the aftermath of the Ahmaud Arbery verdict and some of the themes that kind of come along in that case, things that have surfaced about systemic racism, systematic racism in the South. We talked about how the citizen's arrest law that the murderers used to justify what they did as related to slave law and the black codes from the 1860s. Just a lot of rich discussion, and I'm excited for you to engage in it. Before you do, though, I want to take a moment to thank our incredible sponsors. First of all, Shift Cyclery and Coffee Bar for providing this incredible venue. I want to thank Converge Radio 101.9 FM. Pablo Center at the Confluence, and the University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire. This whole effort, Conversations in Color, would not be possible without their help, without their support. So thank you to them. With no further ado, I invite you into the conversation. Hey, Salika. How's it going?
It's been an interesting day.
Yeah. We were just talking about that a little bit. How was Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving was good.
Yeah.
I think that we had a nice Thanksgiving present in the Ahmaud Arbery case.
Yeah.
Getting the conviction there. Although it's a mixed blessing in some ways.
Sure. Yeah.
For many people, it was a celebratory moment. These people had seen the video, they had seen this case, and they had gone, how could there be anything, how could anyone think this is self-defense?
Right.
And the antics of the defense attorneys really, I think, disgusted a lot of people.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you have activists, especially in Georgia, who are still angry. They're still upset, in part because it took so much work to get this case, to come to trial, to get these people to be arrested. And the cover-up with the DAs really taught people the problem with corruption and district attorneys. Right.
Yeah, I think we should spend some time kind of working through that a little bit together, because I want to hear your perspective on it. And then there's the corruption aspect that you talked about. There is the celebration aspect, and I want to spend a little bit of time there before we go too much further. So I guess I would say, and then in terms of, you had mentioned in a previous episode about how the citizen's arrest law in Georgia, which has since been repealed, was born in the black codes, and I'd like to spend a little time there too. But before we do that, let's just talk about from a you mentioned it like a Thanksgiving gift, hearing about the conviction of the three men who murdered Ahmaud Arbery. What does that conviction, aside from any consideration of how they might get sentenced, because that's another whole thing, what does that do, or what does that mean kind of in the big picture of things? Of course, for Ahmaud Arbery's family, it's very meaningful. For his friends, it's very meaningful. What does it mean in terms of the broader justice and equity movement, in your opinion?
I think a part of this was having that jury with 11 whites and 1 black convict. We heard a lot of spurious arguments, especially around the idea of self-defense. And we also saw people treating those arguments as if they were reasonable. And I think that, especially for people in the Midwest and the West, They weren't used to this Southern sort of gaslighting, where they're doing one thing and they're calling it another thing. So for those of us who were born and raised in the South, or who have relatives born and raised in the South, we were skeptical. We're still worried about covert racism, the fact that the defense got away with peremptory strikes in that manner in a county that's 27% black. Mm-hmm. You wound up with only one black on the jury because they used all the peremptories to get rid of them, and they didn't have to explain why. So there was some stereotyping there, and one of the stereotypes was that whites would protect other whites in that area. So I think it helped to refute that idea that all white Southerners have covert racism. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
I also think the defense antics were so obnoxious.
Yes.
Especially trying to throw the black ministers out of the court.
Right.
That people were going, please God, let them convict just because they did that. And the closing argument where she talked about his toenails and tried to make him sound bestial and tried to make him sound like he was a criminal when all the video evidence said all he did was look at the property. He didn't take anything.
Right.
So that's coon stereotype rose its ugly head. There were people who were worried because lawyers do this because it works. It taps into that comfort, it taps into that fear.
Right.
The fact that this jury resisted all those stereotypes was a cause for celebration. It really was. Now, some people are still worried, though. They're not celebrating yet. They will celebrate when they see how this person is, how these three guys are sentenced.
Right.
Because after the Amber guy or the Dallas case, both on Gene, nobody has faith in the sentencing part.
Right.
And after Walter Scott, people weren't even, with the video where they saw the lady shooting him in the back as he was trying to get away from her. People really didn't have faith in the juries in Georgia, Alabama to convict, even if the video was obnoxious and right there in front of them.
Right.
This too, there's also some angst because this was such an open and shut case in many ways. But it took so much work.
Yeah.
To get it there.
Just to get it into the courtroom.
It took a lot of pressure. 2 different DAs recused themselves. First, 2 different DAs refused to even take it to grand jury. And then one recused herself, and then the other recused herself, and then the Attorney General had to take over the case. And it wound up with a district attorney from a different county.
Right. Now, before we get too far into that, I'm wondering, we talked a little bit about the connection with between the citizen arrest law and the black codes, and it kind of I'm a little bit curious about some of the dynamics at play that you talked about in the courtroom that might be from the defense attorney's perspective, hearkening back to the days of yore. So what I mean by that is, and really not the days of yore, but like using tactics that would have worked not too long ago. And whether it's the jury or that's what, so I'm wondering, like, obviously the dirty toenail thing sounds like that. The thing about ministers, when the defense attorney said something about, not allowing any more black ministers into the courtroom, was that the kind of thing that 15, 20, 50 years ago, somebody would have said, yeah, that's right, they shouldn't be in here?
Well, when you look at the Emmett Till case in 1956, Charles Drew, who was the representative to Congress from the south side of Chicago, came down to support Mamie Till Mobley. And the judge tried to throw him out. First, they didn't even believe that a black person could be a congressman. And there's this part in Eyes on the Prize where they're going back and forth with, and they're saying the N-word. Congressmen? They let them be congressmen? So there was a time, and it wasn't that long ago,
Right.
really into the 80s and 90s, where they would have banned them. In part, it was a disrespect to religion. And in part, they saw white ministers in a different light than black ministers.
Right.
And they saw black ministers as rabble rousers. Because ministers have a long history in the South, black and white, of fighting for civil rights, fighting for justice, in part because of Christianity. And in part because they're connected to the church, so they're not connected to the corrupted monetary structure that you have.
Right.
So for him to specifically say black ministers that way, with that sort of insulting term, tongue there, it links back to that, and it also links to the disrespect you saw to Raphael Warnock, where his opponent would not call him Reverend Doctor, would not call him Reverend, just kept calling him a communist, even though he said he believes in market economy.
Right.
He's a minister. Christian ministers cannot be communists because communists are atheists. So to call a Christian minister that is an insult. But they called Martin Luther King a communist.
Right.
They did the same thing. So really what he was doing was he was insulting the ministers and trying to stir up
Is he referring more to like economic
racism.
communism versus ideological communism?
He wouldn't have known the difference.
Okay.
Communists are boogeymen.
Yes,
They're
I know,
everything
I know,
awful,
I know. I know, but it's interesting though. I was thinking about that dichotomy or the different way of viewing a black minister versus a white minister, and that's not just a Southern dynamic. If I remember correctly, I was doing some research a while back on reading some newspaper articles from the late 19th century, early 20th century from Eau Claire. Where it talked about a black minister was being described. I think he had passed away and it was his obituary. And it described him in very glowing terms, but in a way that's like, we didn't expect this of him.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And there is this sort of, in this time period, this idea that black religious needed to be kept an eye on.
Sure.
And you see that all the way back from slavery, where you had slave ministers.
Yep.
And they wanted to make sure they didn't say anything about Deuteronomy. They didn't say anything of Exodus,
Right.
Leviticus, anything about the Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
They didn't want any of that stuff. They wanted it all to be Philemon. You know? and maybe a little bit of Luke, slaves obey your masters, stuff like that. But this idea of black ministers as this radical buffoon, the way Al Sharpton is really treated in many ways. And Sharpton is very sharp. He does the things he does to get media attention, and he wins. He wins a lot of the time, but the way he's treated is not serious.
Right.
So that's a part of it. He was digging, he was trying to stir what he thought was the covert racism of the jury.
Yeah.
And that backfires, because when you get whites who are not racist and they see these things, they get kind of mad. Why would you think, why would you think I'd do that?
Right.
And he's using as his argument for self-defense a law that began as a slave code that was used to grab runaway slaves. Any white had the right to detain and put a black free or slave into custody, and blacks did not have standing before the court.
Right.
Well, the Georgia law then in 1867 is amended to become a black code. They take the word slave out, they add the word Negro, but it's that any white has the right to detain or hold a Negro suspected of crime or suspected of running away from a labor contract. In the 1960s, it's amended again to say that anyone can be detained by another citizen if they have witnessed them commit a felony. And that felony links to the 13th Amendment and the felony exception. Because you cannot put people at forcible labor without consent except for conviction for a felony. But then they disparately enforced it.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I remember, and I don't know if I got it from television shows or what I got it from, but I remember hearing about the citizen's arrest. And you know, like there was a part of me that thought I had a responsibility as a citizen to be looking out for things. I didn't know anything. I didn't know like about felonies or whatever, but I obviously had no idea where the roots of the citizen's arrest came from. And I don't know if Virginia is one of the states that still has one of those laws on the books, but I think it's really important as you're laying out this history of the citizen's arrest that was on the books when these guys committed this crime that they thought they were operating under, is directly related to, you can trace the lineage right back to slave codes, slave law.
Yes.
And
it's also, it was used to defend lynching. And the ambush lynchings that you have from this time period. So if you look at the murder...
Of course, that's kind of what this was, too.
This was an ambush murder.
Yeah.
You look at the murders of the 3 COFA workers, Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. That first defense that Cecil Price, et cetera, used was, this was self-defense and it was an arrest gone awry. Now, the problem is the physical evidence. If you have shot 2 people in the back and you've castrated the 3rd one, you have a hard time proving self-defense. With that said, they never got Cecil Price for state murder. They had 2 mistrials.
I'm just trying to think through the logistics of that and how you pull that off.
Jury nullification, and you have a culture that
I'm thinking about the actual it being self-defense.
It's not.
How do you castrate a guy and then shoot 2 guys in the back
of the head
in one move?
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't. I mean, physically, it's impossible, but there's long been a wink, wink, nod, nod culture to maintain supremacy and to get rid of undesirables.
Right.
Sort of, you think about it, it's sort of mafioso in some ways. And it's that wink, wink, nod culture is that corruption that I talk about. So you've always had this sort of corruption covered by gaslighting. And they'll say something is happening when it's not actually happening.
Right.
Now, did those guys think chasing a guy on foot who had nothing in his hands was self-defense? That's a hard one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to sit in your property during looting. I mean, I'm from Louisiana. My family lost stuff in Katrina. It's one thing to sit in your house with a rifle and you don't go out looking for trouble. You sit in your house and you keep people from looting it.
Right.
It is another thing to chase somebody with a truck and you have long guns and they are not armed.
Right.
And you don't have proof they committed a crime.
Right.
The only proof he had that he committed a crime was his race.
Yeah, so let's pause here for a minute because I'm struggling with something. I need your help. So I'm trying to think of what is the mental progression that would take somebody from saying, okay, this guy was trespassing and maybe stole something. I know he runs in this neighborhood, or I know he's around. I'm gonna go chase him down and potentially kill him. Versus, like, my instinct would be, I see this guy around, I might go talk to the police. Or I might say, hey, I noticed you. You know, I'm not saying I would do that, but I'm just saying, like, how is it so easy, or apparently so easy for those fellas to move from this guy is on property that's not his to he needs to die?
We dehumanize criminals. We dehumanize people we think are criminals. We dehumanize people we think broke the law if we don't like the law. But who we dehumanize is real interesting. If there's somebody like us, or there's somebody we have a relationship to, we have excuses. The human mind rationalizes all sorts of bad behavior if it's our group's bad behavior.
Yep.
If it's another group's so-called bad behavior, even if we haven't seen it, we're very willing to pull a trigger there.
Right.
Very, on top of that, it's not just in the South, but in a lot of these old Confederate enclaves, and I say this having been born there, and I go back really frequently, there is a belief that black men should submit.
Yeah.
And their argument was he should have just stopped, he should have submitted. But why should he submit to them? They weren't police.
Right. Who are they?
Who are they? They've got guns.
They're white dudes.
They could think, he could have thought they were going to rob him.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like Ida B. Wells in 1880. What made her an anti-lynching advocate was her 3 friends who owned a grocery store had three plainclothes deputies came up to their store at night with rifles. They thought they were selling liquor after, nightfall, because selling liquor to Native Americans and to blacks after 5 o'clock was illegal.
Right.
And this is in Tennessee. And these guys, they exchanged fire. They exchanged shots because the grocers thought they were getting robbed. They didn't kill anybody. The deputies who had a mob with them, and they had deputized this mob. This is also where that citizen's arrest comes in. They had deputized that mob, took these guys, didn't even make it to custody. They just took them out and strung them up. And that was the case that made Ida B. Wells, who got she got a Pulitzer last year for her anti-lynching work.
Yeah.
But it's that entitlement to violence.
Right.
And you have a set of people who feel entitled to violence because the people around them minimize what happened or distort what happened.
Right.
I made the mistake of reading the comments last week. Never read the comments. And the trolls were all out trying to call Ahmaud, Arbery, a criminal. But other people were very well prepared to say, no, he didn't. All the video shows, they had seen the video. They had read the media reports. And it's ironic, there was far less media on the Arbery case, but the media that was there was better than what you saw in the Rittenhouse case. I think because Stacey Abrams' group Fair Fight and a number of the church groups made it a point to talk to that media and to make sure they got their side out.
Yeah.
So the trolls are sitting there and they're pulling out every trope of the coon, and he's a criminal, he's an animal, he's an ape, he's a thug, and they're getting pushed back. Nope, here's the video. Nope, here's the video. But it didn't. I think what was annoying for a number of people, and I'll admit I didn't answer back because I figured if you're doing that, you're trolling, and I'm not even going to engage you.
Yeah.
Was that no matter what evidence they showed these trolls, they just kept doing it.
Right.
And that's that confirmation bias hitting.
Right.
You know, people will just deny.
Yeah.
Anything, they'll deny away, they will pretzel themselves anything that doesn't fit their preconceived notions.
Yeah. How does somebody make that quick transition from this guy went on somebody trespassed and now I need to go kill him? Okay, so I'm thinking about my own life. I'm thinking about when I get stressed, or if I am, I'll just say if I'm stressed. Oftentimes, me being at home in the afternoon during the work week when I am stressed is a bad thing for my stomach, for my belt line, because I go for food to try to make me feel better. Now, when you think about that, there really is no relationship between stress and eating in terms of that being an actual way to make yourself feel less stressed or to deal with the stress in any way. Like, it's not logical.
Yep.
But I have conditioned myself, like a lot of people have, that there's a thought process that's underneath that takes several steps to get to the point where I'll go get that food, but it's automatic for me. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't have to think about it anymore. It's a pattern that I've set down since I was a teenager, that when I'm stressed, I want to eat something. And not just something, I'll probably try to eat everything in the house before the day is over. And so I'm thinking about how, like, we all have those kind of patterns of thought that lead to behavior that maybe sometimes, like a lot of times when you get angry about something and it doesn't seem to be something that's really worthy of a lot of anger, you know, whatever the stimulus is really isn't something, you know, my son leaves something in the wrong place in the house. I shouldn't get super angry about that. But when I trace it back, I see that it's not really about that, and that I've got a thought pattern that I've built over the years to when something's out of place in a certain way, that really bugs me and it reminds me of this other thing. So all I'm saying with that is that we develop these cycles of patterns. Sometimes it's because of trauma. Sometimes it's because it's just the way we were raised to live and believe and to think. And so I'm thinking about, what is that thought pattern that, you know, somebody would go through? Like, in my mind, what I'm seeing is this guy's trespassing, I'm going to go shoot him. I'm here, I go from here to there because that's all I see from these guys. And I'm wondering, what is all the thought progression that led to that point that happened so quickly for them that that's where they went?
Well, you know, you have to put the framework there, though.
Yeah.
The framework is that these guys have been in a culture that taught them that Black life was expendable. And that taught them that it was okay or even heroic to engage in these kind of behaviors.
Right.
And they're surrounded by people who excused it.
Right.
Because if Arbery's mother had not pushed, they'd have gotten away with it.
Right.
The police were going to let them get away with it. The DA was going to let them get away with it. The other DAs evidently approved of it. Mm-hmm. And they were counting on jury nullification to save them. And jury nullification is when the jury looks at the evidence and ignores the law, and they let the person off because they approve of what happened. I mean, the big one I remember is 1985, a guy, and this is a New Orleans one, a guy's son had been kidnapped by a pedophile, and the police had found him in a hotel and gotten the kid back. Well, they extradited the guy from Texas, and this father was waiting on the tarmac when he got off the plane and just shot him dead. On video and everything. Mm-hmm. Looks like an open and shut case, right? No. Jury refused to convict. That is jury nullification.
Right.
And the little secret about the law system that no one really tells you is that juries have the right to ignore the law when they want to.
Right.
And there's a long history in the South, especially in what's called the Black Belt, of majority white juries just straight up ignoring the law.
So what you're saying is, if I was going to sum all that up in a little pithy statement, is that the murder of Ahmaud Arbery was an expression of, I would say, not only systemic racism, but systematic racism.
I would call it racial corruption.
Yeah.
This is a corrupted system, and in that corrupted system, they knew that if they messed with or killed certain people, they'd get away with it.
Right.
You couldn't mess with others, but you mess with this set, you can get away with it.
Yeah. And I think the reason I draw the line between, or I'm making the two separate kind of strains there between systemic and systematic, is because I think saying that we have a systemic racism problem in America is one thing. That's saying that there's stuff ingrained in the institutions in America that by definition favor, or even indirectly favor majority population over minority population and things like that. But I'm saying systematic in that when you talk about the black codes and the slave codes, the slave laws, and how the citizen's arrest is related to that to me, and then you throw in there jury nullification and all these other things, there's a system that's set up so that you can systematically eradicate troublemakers.
Yeah. Well, that's why I refer to it as corruption.
Yeah.
I also sometimes, when I'm trying to talk about this, and I don't want to use academic terms because people hate academics, we jargon too much, I say corruption.
Yeah.
Because this is a form of corruption.
Yeah.
It's a form of abuse of power. The other thing I'll say is bullying. And that sounds to some people like it's minimizing, but it's really not. This is what happens to bullying when you have no enforcement whatsoever.
Right.
And these...
Well, and I think people say you're minimizing it because what's called bullying these days is different than what was called bullying even 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And sometimes it can feel like, wait, is that really bullying, or what is that? You know what I mean?
I think people right now are questioning, what is bullying? What is obnoxious behavior? But there's people who really do feel scapegoated and bullied in the office. We're coming out of a decade, and I would say that it's a 2008 to about 2020, where people felt they were abused. They were abused in offices. Service workers are abused.
Yep.
And there's this line where people have felt they could get away with this stuff because they always did.
Right.
And what's changing that abuse, I mean, I could call it abusive behavior.
Yeah.
And people would understand this is abusive behavior.
Yeah. And underneath of it is intimidation and power, control.
But it's all covert. It's all undercover.
Yeah.
Everybody has had to deal with the sneaky little jerk who will mess with you or sabotage you or scapegoat you. And to say, well, that person could do it because they want your spouse. That person can do it because they don't like your hair color. Or that person can do it because of your race. But we have a culture built that reinforces saying doing it because of your race is okay.
Yeah.
Doing it because of your sexuality is okay. So for people whom that's normalized, and if they're surrounded in an area that's normalized, they've always gotten away with it.
Right.
And it is shocking to them to think there are people who aren't going to let them get away with it.
Right.
The looks on those guys' faces when the jury brought in its verdict, they were stunned. They thought they were getting off.
Right.
And the defense attorney said she was shocked because the culture where they were normally allowed this.
Right.
But now there's just enough people, there's a tipping point. There's a set of people who, they might have tolerated it when it was not in their face. If it was undercover, if it was quiet, they'd have tolerated it. but it's in their face.
Right.
And that sounds hypocritical. It's like the people who get mad, there are white people who get mad at another white person because that white person said the N-word in front of somebody black. But if they're saying it in an all-white space, well, that's okay. And the rest of us are like, what?
Right.
No, that's not okay.
Right.
But within their minds,
That's performative.
it's performative. So they're used to this idea where there's certain behaviors that if you perform them in a covert way, they'll ignore them.
Yeah.
But once they're out and once they're open, you have to put it down.
Right. Well, and so I want to affirm the use of the term bullying, because I think it just, the word needs to be reclaimed a little bit. I think what it comes down to, though, is that it's the idea of, I think it goes even beyond, under the surface of, I'm doing this because you are a female, or I'm doing this because you are a black person, or I'm doing this because of whatever. At the core of it, I think it's all about power, and it's about maintaining power, and doing whatever it takes to remind people that you're the one that's in power. And that takes me to our friends down in the district attorney's office in Georgia. And I want to talk about that a little bit more, because Ahmaud Arbery was murdered in February of 2020, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And it took months and months and months for this to finally come to court. And why is that?
Well, thanks to the Connick case, which is, I want to say 2006, but I'm not swearing to that. District attorneys have absolute immunity at the federal level. So you need very carefully crafted state laws to be able to hold them accountable. And in the Connick case, it's Harry Connick Sr. Yes, this is Harry Connick Jr.'s father. He's the district attorney for Orleans. He's the one who will follow Jim Gardner, the one who famously thought JFK was killed by the mob, if you're an Oliver Stone fan. And Connick was infamous for violating something called the Brady Law. The Brady Law says that if a district attorney has exculpatory or proof of innocence, they're supposed to hand it over to the defense. He wouldn't do that. And he got caught. He got caught big time with a guy who, they had gotten him sentenced to death, and Connick and his crew, there was a bunch of emails that showed they suppressed exculpatory evidence. So the conviction was overturned on appeal, and the man who was falsely convicted sued. And the US Supreme Court said, nope, you can't sue him. They have absolute immunity. So what that has meant in federal court, you can't hold them accountable. And we've been seeing, in the last 10 years, a lot of district attorney abuse. In New Orleans, the district attorney has been jailing witnesses and actually has a consent decree now with the ACLU there. Because with some of the domestic violence witnesses, they were keeping the witnesses in jail longer than the people who were convicted, to try to make sure that they had them available to testify. Right. That's what happens when you get a police department that is absolutely abusive to the community, and the community is just not going to cooperate with them anyway, any shape, anyhow. Since the 1994 crime reform bill, because judges don't have discretion anymore in sentencing, it's really given excess power to district attorneys. So you've seen, saying here, there have been a couple of cases that looked like rape cases. They were charged as rape, and then all of a sudden the charges get dropped all the way down to a misdemeanor. And people are outraged. What's going on? They were overcharged in the first place. So you have two forms of justice.
Do they do that as a way to bargain into a charge?
Yes.
See, that's yucky.
They're trying to force you to plea bargain.
Right.
And it happened to a friend of mine. That's her story. I'm not going to talk about it. But in the end, because she was able to afford an attorney, even though two blood tests and a breath test had come back negative for alcohol or drugs, she's still charged with a DUI. It was her attorney. The judge was forced to drop it with prejudice.
Yeah.
The district attorney did not. So this overcharging has become a big issue. And what you're seeing now is a number of activists are looking to get district attorneys who are saner. 20 years ago, district attorneys didn't want to overcharge because they didn't want to antagonize the public, and they especially didn't want to lose the faith of the public. But the tough on crime wave really pushed them towards being crazy. And broken windows, the idea if you come down really hard on small infractions, like not fixing a broken window or not, cutting your grass, you'll get rid of big crime. And the name of the guy who came up with that, his literal, I'm not making it up, John Quincy Public. That is really John Q. Public. That's really his name. I didn't make that up.
I thought you were going to say Mr. Dumbass.
Well, that's how I refer to him. That's not what his name is. I actually have to number them. But that, what we need are DAs who use their discretion for good and who focus on, violent crimes.
Yeah.
And not overcharging something like marijuana.
Justice. Like actual justice.
But we also need to fully repeal the 1994 crime reform bill, which is the one that put in, if you want to talk about corruption in the law, an ounce of powder cocaine that gets you about a year in jail, more or less, depending on who's working for you and how much of a lawyer you can buy. An ounce of crack gets you 10 years. And that's because people, it was foolishness. It had nothing to do with research. People were afraid of crack babies and all of that stuff.
And what's the difference between those, by and large, who consume cocaine versus those who, by and large, consume crack?
White people are more likely to consume crack cocaine. Okay. Black people are more likely to consume crack.
Is that a socioeconomic thing?
Yes.
Okay, so
you'll have some whites who will do that. Cocaine is the frat boy drug. It's expensive, it's powder. We've always had cocaine. Freebasing starts in the 80s. I mean, Richard Pryor has a whole routine about it. I showed it to my son so he'd never do it. But, freebasing is really something where you can take a very small amount and you make it as potent as a big amount.
Sure.
That's something poor people are going to do.
Exactly.
But as soon as you get to meth, which is actually far more dangerous to you and creates more paranoia than coke, it's a lesser sentence. All right, than crack or cocaine.
I think we could get really lost in these weeds, and we probably should get lost in these weeds sometime soon.
But that's your disparate. This is your corruption built into the system.
Yeah, and so what I want to say is you can have, you were given examples of district attorneys throwing out really outrageous charges against people that they probably knew were not true.
Well, they knew they couldn't.
Accurate.
They didn't have the evidence.
Right.
But they might think it was true, but they just didn't have the evidence.
Right. And in this case, the case of Ahmaud Arbery's murder, they didn't even want to bring charges.
Nope. Well, part of that, you have to have been born in the South. You've been born in the South. Mm-hmm. There's an old boys culture. You scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Yeah.
I won't tell anybody you're cheating on your taxes. You don't tell anybody I'm stealing cable.
Yeah.
So there's an old boy network. In this case, old girl and old boy. Mm-hmm. And a black man's life in that He wasn't rich. He wasn't a college degree person.
Mm-hmm.
Class comes in here.
Right.
You have a lot of poor black boys who disappear. Depending on where you are, you got some poor white boys who disappear as well. When they don't have minorities to scapegoat, they scapegoat poor whites. And that's corruption.
Mm-hmm.
That's abuse of power. And we
Right.
really don't talk about abuse of power a lot because there's a set of people in the US who think that any sort of criticism means you're disloyal.
Right.
They don't do nuance. And I look at them and I go, have you seen King Lear? Cordelia tells her dad, I love you like salt. And he gets mad because the other daughters have told him all this flowery stuff. We love you like this, that, and the other. Yeah, who is it who overthrows him? The other two daughters.
Right.
Who is it who defends him? Cordelia.
Yeah.
So, in my experience, the people who most love a country, who most love a space, are the ones who see its faults. And they want to correct them.
Right.
But you have this set of people who think, that old movie Love Story, some of the people in the audience are too young to remember that. Before Ryan O'Neal married Farrah Fawcett Majors and started doing the talk show circuit, that he actually did a movie. They think that love means excusing everything.
Right.
And we can't do that.
No.
But it also means we have to have a hard reckoning with the people who really do think multicultural people of different sexualities, people with disabilities, etc. They really do think that we are subhuman.
Right.
I was watching the Daryl Daniels video today. If you want to look that up, Daryl Daniels is a black man who finds Klansmen, Grand Dragons, and he befriends them and tries to get them out of the Klan. Far better person than me, far better Christian, I'm going to say that. And he's a jazz musician. His band's really good. But one of the supremacists he was working with was on the screen and saying, I like Daryl. That doesn't mean I'm letting go of the Klan. Mm. He was going, my support for the Klan is cemented in my body. So but Daryl isn't really black. and that's what, you get.
But you're right though. So like Daryl is becoming more human to that guy. But that guy's not making the connection between how the KKK is like still seeing Daryl as less than human.
Well, he's still subhuman. But he's okay.
He's an okay subhuman.
He's an okay subhuman.
Oh,
and I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. And I had to use the video The Last White Knight in one of my other classes. And that one's on Netflix, and it's really good. It's Byron Della Beckwith's brother, the guy who killed Medgar Evers' brother. Mm. Punched out a Jewish man in 1964 during Freedom Summer, and the guy goes back 5 years ago to try to reconcile with him. This is that second principle of nonviolence. To see those who have hurt us as also suffering. Mm. To see people not as evildoers, but as also victims. Mm. And that's hard.
Yeah, it is.
How can I ask the Arbery family to see these three men as also victims?
Right.
And that's the hardest part of nonviolence, and that's why the people who were in the nonviolent movement were a much smaller group than people thought. The majority really were armed self-defense. And Byron Della Beckwith, the brother said that he didn't think the Canadian was equal to him because he was Jewish. Mm. He thought he was subhuman.
Right.
He's polite, he's okay, they can respect each other, but they're not equal.
Yeah.
and he needed to understand they were not equal. But the other thing he said got me. And he said that to treat you as equal would be to take something from me. So a lot of these people who think someone like me is subhuman or someone like you is subhuman, they think equality is a zero-sum game. And if we're equal, somehow they have lost power some way.
Right.
Power to bully us or some power to abuse people or something.
Well,
they see equality as something bad.
Yeah, for them. And there can be some truth to that, right? Like, if, you think about these three guys who were just convicted. You know, they thought they had the power to do this, and they were going to get away with it. And that's not true. And now they're going to go to jail, hopefully for more than 6 months. You know, and so I think there is something to that. But the key, here's the thing. I come back, and we got to, our time is about up, so I'm going to be as succinct with this as I can be. But I think we have to, in my opinion, as people, do our best to come in line with the truth, whatever the truth is. And if the truth is that all people were created equal, if the truth is all people are created in God's image and are image bearers of God and have inherent value and are an equal value, then the power structure has to shift, because we can't, those three guys can't feel like it's okay for them to abuse the power they think they have in that way, which is, I think, why the conviction is meaningful, right? Like, I think everybody kind of gets that. People who are celebrating kind of get that. Like, that power that they thought they had has been taken away. They don't have that power, and it communicates to others they don't have that power. But I think that kind of coming in line with the truth of the value of people, if the people who don't do that, like this guy you were just talking about, he's going to go punch somebody else because they're Jewish. They're just going to keep doing it.
Well, this is the hard part, because on one hand, we want to celebrate Arbery.
Right.
But on the other hand, we wonder how many Arberies are out there that got away with.
That's right.
And how do we fix this system so they don't get away with it? And the problem with so much power in the hands of the DAs and very few checks.
Yeah.
Without a check, it's really hard to make sure these DAs are not corrupted.
Yeah.
And that's your problem here. The problem in our system is that if an individual doesn't want to behave right, there are very few checks.
Yeah.
There's very few things in this system, especially if they've normalized that misbehavior, to prevent them from acting in a corrupted way.
Right.
And we as a set of humans can't figure out how to sit down and think about what checks are necessary and what checks are unnecessary.
Right.
Because we tend to weaponize the checks against the people we don't like.
Yep.
And we ignore the checks with the people we do like.
And this is why saying that people are good all the time is not true. We are a mixed bag.
To be human is to be stupid at least a third of the time. I start my classes off with that. History is the study of humans being stupid.
Right.
Humans are not rational. There are times when people ask me, so why did this person do that? I don't know, they were high. Who knows?
Right.
Sometimes they were high is the right answer. Sometimes they were drunk is the right answer. Sometimes, they're just stupid.
Yeah.
It's kind of like...
They're not thinking straight.
And bringing this full circle, because we were talking about how hard it is to teach middle school at the beginning of this conversation. One of the things I've learned with two kids, and with 35, good Lord, years of teaching undergraduates and grad students, is that sometimes people do things and they don't even know why they did it.
That's right.
And you ask them and they get the deer in the headlights. Why did you not show up for 5 weeks to my class? If they're honest, they'll tell me I don't know.
Right.
Otherwise, I'll get some crazy response.
Yeah.
You know, or you ask your kid, why did you put a rock through the door, through the window of the house? I don't know.
So,
And I think that for these guys, if you ask them why they did it, they didn't really know.
Mm-hmm. So in summary, as we take our last sips and get ready to go home to our families, we're all pretty messed up.
But that doesn't mean we can't save ourselves. We have to figure out a way to stop demonizing each other.
Yeah.
And we have to push back on this subhuman enemy of the people mindset that we're seeing from extremists.
Yeah.
You know, this, you're a communist, you're going to hell. You're a fascist, you're going to hell. I guess, no, is it you're a fascist, you're going to hell?
It's all of it. They might
It's
not say
all
you're
of
going
it.
to hell, but they'll say, you might as well burn in hell.
Yeah, you can't drink beer with me.
Right.
And when I first came
It's
to...
a test of fellowship.
It's a test of fellowship. And the one thing when I first came to Eau Claire was everybody could drink the beer. So I think we have to get back to that. But I'm old now. I don't drink beer anymore.
Okay. Everybody has to drink the Coke Zero.
They got to drink the Coke Zero. We get old.
Well, we better cap it here because the beeper's going to go off on us before too long, saying it's time to be done. But thanks as always for the conversation. It's been rich, and we'll look forward to doing it again soon.
And it's been a pleasure, my friend.